Well, today we have two conversations as always, but we'll stay with the tax law. That's the act. It's becoming an act now that President Bola Tinubu signed last week Thursday, and it's aimed at modernizing and streamlining the country's tax system. In the new tax law, the value-added tax remains at 7.5%, despite initial proposals to increase to 12.5%. But its scope is expanded. Essential items such as food, education, healthcare, public transport, residential rent, and exports are zero-rated to ease inflationary pressure. For revenue allocation is structured. Now 30% VAT proceeds are distributed based on consumption rather than contribution, 50% equally among states, and 20% to population-based allocation. Well, let's get into the details of the Nigerian Tax Reform Act. And joining me live from Abuja via Zoom is a development economist, Professor Ken Ife. Prof, I must thank you so much. Good afternoon. It's good to have you on the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, Prof, I think we should start our conversation today by you giving us an overview of what you see. A lot of positives around this document. But in your understanding, I know you followed all of this from the start to where we find ourselves. What do you make of this? Many say Nigeria is never, we are never short of documents. But when it comes to implementing them is always the issue. But before we get to implementation, what do you make of this new act as signed by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and its implication for businesses and the larger economy?
I think it's a great piece of work. Excellent. And very, very transformative. And if you look at where we came from a tradition of being, first of all, I mean, this document precedes our independence and has so archaic, both in content and even in the implementation. So what has happened now is that a new view is given to this process. It's a very, very progressive tax system, and it deals exactly with the kind of challenges we are having. Now, first of all, there's always an issue of trust deficit for the government, because that's why people are much more inclined not to pay tax. But we also have the incidence of very high informal trade. So you can see how it tries to put this on autopilot. In the administration side of it, you are going to see how it's going to want to bring a lot of automation, remove a lot of middlemen, enable you to go and do your own assessment, and then have, so there are ways, and then it puts some markers that say to you, look, if you have your NIN, oh yeah, okay, we can look at up to 200,000 naira rent rebate will come in. Then you use little things that are there to encourage you to transit, and then you will have to have an card anyway. So does it mean anything to the businesses? Of course, it's a hell of a lot. It deals with a lot of the issues about the ease of doing business, which is removing multiple taxation. Because in some cases, if people have over 100 taxes, I think it's River State or something, but on average, it's about 60 taxes, only 6 of which are giving government over 90% of their revenue. So they have to come to terms with those and then move from FIRS to a national revenue service that can, rationalize all that. And then also stop a lot of duplication. Now, then you also have the issue that the most contentious one has been on the VAT component, where the traditional formula that we have is government takes only 15% for collection, because it is actually a consumption task that originates from the states and local governments. So the state government gets 50%, and then 35% goes to local government. But the president, in his wisdom, decided to remit 5 out of that 15% to the states. So the state now has 55%, and the local government keeps at 15%, 35%. But within the state revenue, where there are also some sub-formula for distributing those, one of them is how much of it can be done equally, shared equally with the states, 50%. You know, we like sharing. 50% of it is shared. Then there's another 2 that is based on the population. It used to be 30, but it's 30, but flipped to 20. Then the last one is derivation. So how do you reward the people who actually generate that VAT? So the committee actually wanted to make it much, much higher, but they battled them down to 30, they battled them down to 30. So, and it's all part of the trust deficit because people don't know what government is doing and they don't trust what government is doing. And there wasn't enough communication and the sensitization. So it erupted. But eventually, wisdom prevailed and the governors had a buy-in, but not without tinkering with those numbers. And they explained, it's a very good tax system. Very, very interesting, very, very good.
Interesting way to start, Prof. And I like the fact that you alluded to the issues that propped up, the governors, the sharing formulas of VAT, and all of the political interference that came up during this bringing up this document. But my next question to you would be, Mr. Taiwo Edele was quoted, and he said it, and I also heard him say, this is pro-poor. I want you to make us understand how this document or this act is pro-poor. For me, I only see that aspect of maybe those earning below or around 800,000 naira per annum, they won't be taxed and all of that. Can you tell us more about how this really impacts the poor and maybe small businesses?
Well, one is that threshold that if you are earning less than 800,000, forget about tax. But there is another thing because, in the end of the day, it went to the consumers to remove all those taxes that contract their disposable income. For example, VAT on food removed, on health services, on education services. So these are where they spend their money. And many families spend up to 40% of their money on education, or 20%, depending on how many children they have and at what age they are. So it removed all that. So the effect of this is that they are now going to have more disposable income. And with more disposable income, people's consumption will increase. They will purchase more products and GDP goes up. Because once aggregate consumption goes up, GDP goes up. Then it goes to MSMEs, not only that it moves their threshold from 25 million to 50 million before they go bother about tax, paying tax and all that stuff. Then it also means you are allowing the companies to keep a lot of their income. You are removing the multiple taxation factor. You are removing all the things they could. You are removing the red tape, the time that they spent juggling with tax-related accounting. So what you are doing now, with them conserving more, they can keep the jobs. They can create more jobs. They can increase investment in output. Aggregate output goes up. GDP goes up. And then the other 2 items in the GDP pillar is just government consumption, which keeps going up anyway because government keeps borrowing money. Then the last one is the balance of payment, which has flipped from negative balance of payment with the subsidy removal, is now in positive territory, about plus $6.8 billion. So these are all going to be pushing up GDP. GDP is going to be going up. And obviously, too, that they are also getting, there are people in agriculture, because people like rural communities, those in agriculture, agribusiness, completely removed, and just as military, they also were removed. So again, it's trickling down. Then the inflation, not inflation, the VAT that was intended to go from 7.5% over time to 15%, they're taking that off. So they're keeping it at 7.5%. And you know why this is necessary? In theory, Nigeria is said to have the lowest tax to GDP ratio, which was 7% going up to 9, 10, now 10.5. But the reality is in Africa, the lowest GDP, tax to GDP ratio in Africa. But in the actual fact, we are the highest in implicit tax. Implicit tax means what other taxes are you paying as a business? These guys are paying inflation tax. They are paying, they are buying their own fuel. They are generating their own power. They go to the website of MAN. Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, said that manufacturers spend 77% of their power. They only get power. They use their own power 77% of the time. They are burning diesel. They are burning fuel, and that's what. Then water. If you want water, you do your own. You do your own borehole. If you want road leading to your factory, you build it yourself. If you want, so all these services, all this infrastructure, they are bearing all that cost. So the implicit tax is the highest in Africa. So you have to be mindful. The committee is mindful of this, that the burden is so much on business that you need to begin to remove all that. And so on the face of it, people think that, oh, government may receive less revenue because there's a lot of money taken away. It's not. It's going to get more. Because when you go over to the tax administration side, you will see how they are involving more automation. They are going to remove a lot of the middlemen. They are going to remove do the leakages. So in the end effect, the government will even be getting more money. But why do you tax capital, tax investment, tax poverty? Why are you doing that? And that's why people don't want to come into the economy. But now you now have a tax system that people are, even investors, foreign investors are going to like this, because they are going to see a CIT, corporation income tax, drop from 30% to 25%, and then further to 20%. And in terms of tax planning, when you're doing a business plan, tax planning is part of it. You need to anticipate what tax you are going to pay with the people you are going to employ. But what you cannot anticipate in the present regime is what they're going to throw at you. But now, from 1st of January, you can have a clearer view of your tax commitments, and then you can provision them in your plan. So that's a big plus for this. But will it raise taxes? I think the answer is no. But it will expand the people that enter into the tax net. That's how I see it.
Will it help address or increase our tax to GDP ratio, which you will agree with me as still being very low compared to other African countries, our peers?
Definitely. The average tax to GDP ratio is about 18% in Africa, and we are punching much below that at about 10.5%. But as I said, the implicit tax is what is more important.
Yeah.
Because the implicit tax is the tax that is borne by the business. And that is where the businessman is building his own power station. He's delivering 70% of his power, or 77% according to MAN on their website. And he's also getting his own road, getting his own water supply, borehole, he's bearing all that cost, excruciating cost. And so you could see that this tax regime is actually going out to meet them at their point of needs, and then improving the investment environment, and then also making sure that something like excise duty on telecom and forex inflows is blown that, so that you can open up and encourage more of these inflows. And then even when you look at the definition of VAT, no VAT, and zero-rated VAT, there are two different things. Because if you are doing no VAT, you cannot claim the input VAT. But if you have zero-rated, like in food, if food is zero-rated, rather than say no VAT, then you can actually claim VAT on the input tax, on the input VAT, because you would have paid VAT on some of the services that you require, or things that you require to make that food. So that is the thing. That's the very important difference. And then you also brought tax appeal tribunal, and then also the ombudsman. Now, the tax appeal tribunal deals normally with any assessment, and you don't agree with the assessment, you go to tax commissioners, and then they get the judgment. And if there's an appeal goes to high court. From high court, you can run all the way to whether you are going to Supreme, whatever. But there may be a case where suddenly these people come and seal your compound. You're not going to go with that to tax appeal tribunal, because they've even given you tax. You haven't even started arguing with them. You go to ombudsman. Do you understand? So that's another dimension that is going to help, help smoothing things out. But I tell you this: in normal international balance, we expect a reasonable interval between enactment and going into force. And 6 months is a reasonable interval. So they should go and sensitize every Dick and Harry. Sensitize the individuals, communities, businesses, give them templates of what their tax claims could look like. Let them see. You wait until January, you enter into crisis, because January is when the whole thing will kick in. So but you have all this time now, this 6 months, to go and sensitize and bring people on board for them to understand what is going on. Remember, AFCTA, we were about to sign it when suddenly there was an outcry from the organized private sector that they didn't know what was going on, and they had to suspend this for 1 year. So we should use this time to sensitize people and make sure that they understand what it takes.
Now, you talked about the 6 months because the implementation should start by 1st of January 2026. Many say, like I said earlier, implementation is key. Are you seeing this really being implemented to the latter? That's talking about, you know what we faced with the PIA, Prof, and what we are still facing with the PIA.
I know.
So, you know?
Yeah, but it's good actually that the president believes in PIA and is implementing it faithfully, having some sanity coming into the supply chain. But anyway, and private sector investing more. Now, the thing about the implementation are two things. One, if you go further to look at other parts of the document, they actually began to prescribe where some of these revenues could be targeted. For example, they want to see more investment in human resource development, in hospitals, in education, and all of that. So that is one way of trying to direct people's mind to where they would want this expended. But on the other hand, and then also, you know how the revenue collection, the immediate objective of this reform is not actually revenue collection per se. It is really about making sure that you use progressive taxation to encourage businesses to do more, sucking more people into the tax net, and then gradually grow the business to the point where they will start paying taxes. So that is the point. That's the greater thing. But of course, I'm happy that they will also sort of roll over the job of the customs. But when it comes to implementation actually belongs to, much of it belongs to another arm, another fiscal law, which is called the Fiscal Responsibility 2007, because that is what governs public finance management. And that is where you see, where you have to do fiscal strategy paper, get all the fundamentals right, and then get into the budgeting process and do a rolling plan, 3-year rolling plan, and then come to the big elephant. The big elephant is government borrowing. Government borrows money because it hasn't got anything to invest. So it borrows and borrows and borrows, and we end up using all the revenue you are going to raise from this tax reform to go and service debt. So it is within there that you find a lot of restrictions on government agencies, a lot of clamping down on the money that they have. 80% of your operating surplus must go to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. You mustn't do this, you mustn't do that. So that's that. So we need to still update that, because for over 3 years now, they're on the third reading of an amendment of that act, which will give it teeth and which will give it prosecutorial powers, and which will also give it what we call penalties or from infractions, and so without that, it can't fly. But I'm glad that the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission have just got theirs out in 2005, and that has some provisions for infractions and penalties and all of that.
Well, it's a good way to live it. Let's see how the implementation goes and moving forward. But generally, Prof, I always like to have your outlook. This is another step taken following the reforms that we've seen. What else are you looking at, considering your outlook for Nigeria's economy's revival? Let me use that word.
I think we're going to see more collection efficiency. I think we're going to see more protection for small business. And then we're going to see more and more businesses transit from informal to formal. And because in ECOWAS, last month, we had a workshop in Côte d'Ivoire. And then the OECD came and gave us a report that shocked everyone. We've always been saying that our intra-regional trade is 10% or 12%, but they actually showed us that it is 38%. So there's a lot more happening that we are not able to catch. And that's because of the level of informal trade. So a lot of these transitions will going to take place, because if we are with increased automation coming in on the administration side of things, and with the possibility that you do what Lagos did, which is go for, let people tell you what they think that they owe, and let them pay it, and then get a certificate for whatever they paid. And then they will do the first year, they do the second year, the third year, a tax officer will sit with the person and say, okay, let's have a look. We'll go through what you have done the first year, second year, and then, look, your next door neighbor who is in exactly what you are doing, the same turnover, is actually paying 3 times more tax. Then the man apologizes and starts paying more. So, that kind of thing. So you have that level of self-regulation and then progressive taxation and all that stuff. So eventually, we're going to be better off. Honestly, I think so.
I must thank you so much, Professor Ken Ife, for your time on the program. As always, development economist, thank you so much for joining us live from Abuja. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
My pleasure.
All right, then now still to come.